Good evening to the third Monday evening that I'll be presenting this month. My name's Ross, and we're going to commence as usual with a meditation. And because it's quite a warm evening, we might be inclined to a particular problem or a tendency in meditation, which is referred to as, rather evocatively, sinking. I think it's a bit like putting a brick on quicksand and just watching it slowly, ever so slowly, sink beneath the mud. And not only that, but continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the unbelievable depths of psychic sludge where we can barely muster even a little portion of awareness or consciousness. So it's similar to going to sleep, but in some ways even more powerful. And one of the factors producing such a strange but also very familiar state, as we'll find out, is the sheer fact that we're not stimulating our gross physical senses as we normally do. So by gross physical senses, I'm referring to our eye awareness, ear awareness, taste awareness, touch awareness, our general body awareness, all of our senses that we use to open conduits and sort of doorways to the world of sensory stimulation. And we're not undervaluing these senses, but we're going to propose that for the sake of this particular meditation, which is designed to rest the mind on a single point of focus, those activities of what we call the gross physical senses are distractive. And they're also stimulating, but they're stimulating in a rather superficial, excited way. There's not a lot to them if we try to extract some essence from it. However, if we keep trying to replenish them all the time, we can keep ourselves pretty busy, pretty active. And so that's why we're doing this constantly on our iPhones. It's like everyone on the train's gone into a deep trance with their iPhones these days. People don't even look at what's going on around them. They're so preoccupied with the stimulation coming from just their thumb on the screen. So that's kind of an encapsulation of this seeking superficial. I'm not using superficial in a judgmental way here. I'm using superficial because it's not really getting us very far in terms of understanding the nature of our world, how we're living in it. We're just skimming the surface in the same way that we see an insect flying around a room looking for a flower to land upon. We just buzz as busily as we possibly can. And so it's this barrage of sensory activity that keeps us kind of alert, but it's not a real alertness, because when we start to focus on our single object, we begin to withdraw from that sensory machinery, and we don't empower those sensory consciousnesses to operate through those particular sensory gateways with the same force or velocity. And we would rather hope that we take the energy that's been extracted and withdrawn from those senses to strengthen our focus on our chosen object single-pointedly, i.e. the breath. However, for many of us, or most of us at some time in our meditation, that's not what happens. We sink. And we sink in imperceptible stages. And that's why I use the analogy of the mud and the brick. We don't suddenly drop into this sort of sluggish inertia. We slide into it with perfect, subtle, invisible thrust. It's extremely stealthy. And most of us realise the degree to which we've sunk when we suddenly hear a noise, a door slams, and we go, ugh. And at that moment our heart pounds, our breathing picks up, And we get this incredibly acute sense of awareness, don't we? And that sense of awareness, that keenness, that bareness of awareness, that sheer clarity and precision of focus that's in that moment of shocked awareness, if we like, we can talk of that kind of quality of mind being applied to our meditation object. That's the kind of clarity and intensity that we're trying to bring to bear on the breath. But that's not quite as simple as it seems to achieve. So what we have to do is, as I mentioned last week, from time to time, when the mind of just mindfulness itself, which has the capacity and the role of recollecting our object, recollecting, regathering, remembering, refocusing on the object, that mind, when it gets broken by an interruption, needs to be replaced. And we need to use discriminating alertness to replace the mind on the breath when it's being distracted. But we also, and this is the essence of the introduction at the moment, we also need to check with introspection as to the quality of our mindfulness. How alert, how sheer, how aware is that mind that's holding the breath? If it lacks sufficient intensity, definitely we're sinking. So we have to pick it up. We have to pick sinking up and pull ourselves up, so to speak, like that elbowing up in the mud, to get a gasp of air again. I'm not saying to take a gasp of air literally, but to become aware again of our object without the burden of that heaviness that's coming. So the word sinking is very, as I mentioned, very evocative, because we also experience physical inertia, heaviness, when we're sinking. So that's another clue. If your body's sort of going, you see this, I see it, you might not see it, because I'm up a little bit higher here, but invariably some of us will be going like this. That's sinking. And some people fall over. Some people slide out of their chairs. Some people find their chin resting on their chest or the ear resting on their shoulder. So we've lost the tone of our body because we've lost the tone of our mindfulness. So again, that's a little clue. So I mentioned in the first week the very famous analogy of the lute. And the Buddha gave this analogy to talk about the way in which we need to balance tension with relaxation in this meditation. Tightness with letting go. So letting go here isn't the same as just giving up or abdicating any responsibility as a meditator. It just means that if we're feeling a lot of excitement, and for a lot of us we've had a very busy and exciting and even overwrought day, so we're bringing a mind crowded with activity, superficial activity, it's just whatever's pouring through our consciousness. That kind of activity has to be allowed to subside. And that's not sinking. See how subtle this is? We can let go of the busyness of our mind with alertness and clarity. We don't let go of the busyness of our mind with this sort of wish to become so relaxed that we're going to go into a state of slumber. So there's a distinct difference here in the kind of Buddhist meditation I'm presenting, which is classical mind. I mean, they can't even use the word mindfulness meditation anymore because it's been co-opted by so many business uses and so forth. But it does come from this classic, I was mentioning amongst many sutras, I mentioned the Satipatthana Sutra, the 4 close establishments of mindfulness, or the 4 close mindfulnesses. It's a very famous short sutra of the Buddha, where he talks about establishing this state of mindfulness in relation to the body, and that can be in our case the breath, in relation to feeling, and Westerners use the word emotion here, but we don't really have an equivalent for emotion in the same way in the Buddhist tradition, and thought, and phenomena itself. Nothing's left out of the fourth category. And so we train ourselves to become aware, mindfulness, of those four spheres. And this has an incredible value in terms of beginning to approach the reality of what's sitting here, who we are, what's the world around us, what is our relationship to that world, what is our relationship to other people, indeed, what's our relationship to ourself. We can't begin to even chisel away at these sorts of apparently very obvious structures without gaining some technique which has sufficient clarity and precision to move through habit, preoccupation, obsession, all of the usual hustle bustle of our compulsive being, our untrained, untamed being. We have to somehow find a way of negotiating that without having to project yet another struggling self. I'm the meditator trying to learn to meditate, all that stuff that we do all the time, self-improvement, movement. You know, it's a massive urgency in our culture to improve ourselves by getting everything integrated and organised properly so that we actualise our inner being and become a lion or a tiger or whatever it is that we're trying to achieve. This kind of almost heroic, egoic hyperventilation is exhausting. So we're trying to find something else to do with ourselves that's going to step aside from that whole project. And that's what this meditation offers in its unbelievable candour, its sheer simplicity. It has benefits that are way beyond what we anticipate intellectually if we actually engage in the practice. So I'm just encouraging us to really give this a go. So I'm going to also, at the beginning of the meditation, spend some time framing or encouraging us to frame our motivation for the meditation. And this is a way of, I like to see it as a sort of form of globalising our responsibility as a meditator. And I don't mean that in a sort of political or even ethical way, although it does have overtones, definitely, of an ethical responsibility. But it's really trying to establish a place for me as the meditator in relationship to my goals in the future. And because I'm trying to sidestep that egotistical amplification thing that I was describing a few moments ago, we're trying to somehow get around or cut through that. We try to open out our motivation unbelievably wide, to look at ourselves as an agent, i.e. this one thing, this one person, who is actually, no, don't get me wrong here, this one person is remarkable, but so is your one person remarkable. It's remarkable to be a person. I don't know if you ever wake up in the morning and go, wow, this is remarkable. Did anyone do that this morning? It is actually remarkable. And not only that, but we're remarkably fortunate now to be sitting here considering how remarkably fortunate we are. Because there are places, as we know, in the world where people can't even think for a minute other than rescuing their child from a bomb by hiding under a collapsing kitchen table in a collapsing apartment in Syria, for example. The dread, the fear, you know, the torment, the chaos, it's, you know, there's a huge amount of turbulence. But for whatever reason, at the moment, we're in this incredibly simple, safe and benign place. And so this is the unique opportunity, unparalleled, even perhaps in our own continuum in this lifetime. We've never been in a better position than to say, what can I do now with this one? And so we say, just as this one wants happiness and not to suffer, so does each and every one equally. And we investigate this in meditation. We check this out, we analyse it, we come to it from many, many different directions just to check whether that's true or not. And then we resolve, if it is true, what logic could I possibly have, or rather illogic, as it turns out, that would emphasise the happiness of this one over the happiness of not just the other one, but the other ones. In other words, I'm talking about selfishness here. But I'm talking about selfishness in a deep, cognitive, grappling manner. It's the kind of selfishness that when it sees an opportunity arise, starts to manoeuvre to get that opportunity for itself. So I can give, we can all come up with examples of this, but I know myself, if there's 3 pieces of cake and I've come into a room late and there's 10 people and they're all gathered around the table and they've all got the eye on the 3 pieces, which I've assessed because I know that there's going to be trouble, I then position my body stealthily. I'm not going to do it outright because I'm not silly. So I sidle in and have the conversation strategically as I go so that I'm within arm's reach. And just as I'm about to reach my slice, which I've managed to get this far towards, someone else reaches over and takes it from under my hand. And at that moment, I experience upset. I'm traumatised. I'm deeply disturbed. It's severe psychological pain that arises at that moment. And I'm kind of exaggerating deliberately because that's emblematic. That example is emblematic. We do it on every scale of our lives, whether it's our career, our fulfilment in life, the quality of our partners, the quality of our possessions, the quality of our holidays, the quality of our appearance, etc., 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 etc. There's no limit to that kind of process. And so Buddhism is going to invite us to undercut that momentum that's in every direction by just simply learning, at least at the moment, to quietly sit with what we have here. And because we have this opportunity to learn and experience and explore our reality, we deliberately turn that opportunity away, offer it as a gift towards the benefit of all others. And this is incredibly meaningful because it reshapes the logic of our meditational experience, because it's no longer inscribed or enshrined within our egotistical bubble. We've actually offered it in advance. So it's a different act. From a Buddhist point of view, we say that if we give a piece of cake to one person in order to stop them crying, for example, say a child, that has a particular benefit. It's measurable in some way. It's a certain portion of benefit. If we give that same piece of cake to a one person and wish that all beings who are hungry might be without hunger, that same apparent act, ostensibly from a Buddhist perspective, is enormously, vastly different, because it is the material basis, in this case of offering. The object is the cake, but the actual offering, generosity is the act itself, has a momentum that is geared towards the welfare of this vast number. And so Geshe Lam Rinpoche gives this beautiful example of squeezing the oil from a single sesame seed. We all know if you try to extract the oil from a single sesame, yes, we'll get some sesame oil, but it'll be microscopic. So that's like giving one person a piece of cake. We extract a little portion of virtuous momentum. But if we offer that cake with this wish that all beings might go without hunger, not just now but in all future lives, and that might fuel their bodies so that they can then take advantage of their experience and develop their full potential up until enlightenment, that kind of vast, expansive extension of our motivation is like squeezing a universe of sesame seeds to extract their oil. We have an unbelievable, infinite ocean of sesame seed oil. The reason being that we have an infinite ocean of sentient beings. Buddhism proposes, provocatively, and rather sort of in a challenging manner, that the number of sentient beings is limitless. There's not a sort of wall at the edge of the universe that you sort of fall over or you hit and can't go beyond which there's no humans, or not even no humans, but no beings, no sentient beings. There are countless galaxies, countless numbers of sentient beings existing in countless times across unbelievable magnitudes of transformation, disintegration, and so forth. And so even, as we know, even this world system has a certain duration cosmologically. So there are worlds arising, worlds collapsing, worlds forming, beings appearing here, beings appearing there. Lama Zopa Rinpoche gives the example of ants. How many ants are in your garden? How many beings are in your garden? Count the insects, count them all, just keep counting. It would be impossible perhaps to count them, and you haven't even moved to the next door neighbours. So this meditation embraces each and every being, even if it's not in a human life form, so we feel that we're making contact with them. And this is really a form of I might call it a karmic promise, because we're aspiring, or in a way promising, to work for this person's benefit. And as came up rather interestingly on the first night, someone asked the question about the Holocaust. We're going to wish that everyone has happiness and not suffering, even those who might ostensibly be our enemies or appear as our problem people at the moment or in this lifetime. We don't leave any out. So we can explore some meditations, but there's one meditation where we try to remember the kindness of our mother. And some people say, I can't do that meditation because I have a really awful mother, an abusive, difficult mother, and it was hell. And they've never forgiven her, and they haven't spoken to her for 40 years, and that even if she had cancer, they wouldn't go and see her because she got what she deserved. And we hear people talking like this. And so Geshe Rabten, another one of the Tibetan Lamas, one of my teacher's teachers, said that we can't make the promise, may all sentient beings become enlightened except for my mother. You just can't do that. It's not fair. Because your mother of this lifetime may not be your mother of the next lifetime, if you look at it that way. And your mother of the next lifetime mightn't be your mother of this lifetime. If we're looking at countless lifetimes across countless spaces, across countless galaxies, we're in these infinite numbers of permutations and combinations in relation to one another. And so if we try to essentialise and objectify the immediate projected nature of our social relationships according to my projection, I like them, I don't like them, I couldn't care less, we're obscuring in a very, very profound way the reality of our relations with the world around us. So again, these are provocative ideas, but even symbolically they're very powerful, I think you'd have to admit. Even if we treat them sort of as allegories for how we might transform our social existence, they're very, very effective tools. So let's do the meditation, and as we have done in previous weeks, we're going to sit. If we're in a chair, we can make sure that we're sort of planted in the chair, we're anchored in the chair, rather than sort of perching awkwardly on the edge so that we're going to feel a bit unsettled. So it can help to have the feet on the ground in a symmetrical manner. I notice some people have got cushions as well to lift their feet up a bit. Whatever makes you feel stable and comfortable. And if you're on the carpet, just to pay attention to the symmetry of the posture. It's good to have a symmetrical posture because it helps the energy flow. And some of us will sit in sort of cross-legged or even lotus postures with, the feet up on the thighs and so forth. These are valuable things to do, but not essential. And we can also rest our hands. There's different traditions, even in Buddhism, but we can rest the right hand in the left hand with the thumbs touching. And just rest them so that they form an apex at about the point of the triangle. And the arms slightly out from the body. Particularly on a warm night. This helps air to circulate. So just pay attention now to the spine. So we're bringing the attention now into the body. Just assessing the posture. So we check the spine, starting at the base and moving upwards. And just as we might stack a single column of coins, one upon the next, so that the column doesn't topple, arrange the vertebrae one upon the next as we move up the spine. Not leaning forward or back, not leaning left nor right. Completely vertical. So we can rotate the torso, manoeuvre on the hips, whatever we need to do, just to find this point of equilibrium. Helps also to check the shoulders at their level. When we get to the neck, obviously the spine's continuing. If we try to have the top vertebrae completely vertical, in line with the very bottom vertebrae, it will create a sense of tension or awkwardness. So we ever so slightly tilt the chin towards the chest, just enough to take off any stress from the top of the spine, the vertical spine. So again, we'll know this intuitively. So just experiment. When we get to the jaw, we relax the jaw, relaxing any clenching of the teeth, tightness. You rest the tongue on the upper palate at the front, just gently. This enables saliva to flow in a comfortable fashion as we meditate, without having to pay undue attention to dryness or swallowing. And the eyes can be partially open, looking down the side of the nostrils in an oblique gaze towards a spot on the ground about a metre away, which we hold in soft focus, just allowing light to enter. Or if we feel uncomfortable or aren't used to this particular form of meditating with the eyes partially open, we can shut them. But be aware in this case that it's easier to become sluggish, to experience sinking. So now for a few minutes we'll let go of any stored tension in the body. It's often stored in particular places in the body, and we can pay special attention to these. So just feel that with the out-breath, any stress, tiredness, illness, pain, discomfort, whatever it might be, effortlessly dissolves with the out-breath. in the form of smoke, which evaporates at the furthest point, and then with the immediate in-breath, radiant light pours into the body, saturating every single molecule, every single portion, every single corner, just as we might fill a vessel with liquid to the brim. So as this meditation progresses, we touch more subtle physical stress and let it go, and more deeply relax. If we're distracted, we simply return to the visualization of relaxing the body. If we have a particular physical ailment, even a serious illness located somewhere in the body, we can use this technique as a healing meditation. In the same manner, seamlessly shift our focus from the body to the mind. Just as we did with the body, become aware of the mind, but more particularly the contents of the mind. Feel that with the out-breath, any anxious, disturbing, chronic thoughts leave with the out-breath in the form of smoke and dissolve, and clear, open, spacious mind in the form of light pours in, allowing more subtle levels of mental agitation to dissolve, which leave with the out-breath. So again, in this progressive fashion, we bring about a relaxed mind. If we're feeling mentally tired or even exhausted, let this go with the out-breath and breathe in a rested, reinvigorated mind. So just work with whatever conditions we find. And now, without distinguishing or demarcating either body or mind, just allowing them both to appear simultaneously, just let go of any residual tension with the out-breath and breathe in its opposite, so that it pervades our being. Now we move into the motivation phase of the meditation. We're going to do it differently this evening. So this is an example now of an analytical meditation. We're going to set up a visualized structure to work with. So firstly, we establish ourselves just as we are, where we are, as an impartial observer. So just gain this sense of a stance as an impartial observer. We're not Ross anymore, whoever we might be as a particular named person. We're simply an acute, objective awareness which is able to observe and make judgments or decisions, to analyse, in other words, objectively, clearly, without prejudice. So just find this fulcrum in the centre. Now on our left-hand side, facing the same way as we are, as an impartial observer, visualise ourselves in our usual form. Feeling this is Ross, this one is Ross, or whoever we might be as a particular person, sitting here right now. So just observe ourselves, in other words, but feeling that we're really sitting here next to us, with all of our usual preoccupations, thoughts, just as we are in daily life. And on the right-hand side, we establish a visualization of at least 10 people. The number is important. At least 10. These people are actual individuals other than ourselves. So in the classical presentation of this meditation, it's often recommended that we pick 10 needy persons, perhaps beggars. But once when I was doing this meditation on a Monday night, the two young sociologists in front of me, meditating, jumped up and left the Gompa. They were outraged that I had considered that beggars would be unfortunate or disadvantaged or miserable in some way. So what we're trying to establish in this part of the meditation is this group on the other side which is in need, and to do this without any artifice. There are people out there in need. So now, as the impartial observer, just look at the left side and the right side and consider how usually this one on the left is thinking me, 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 me. Even if it's not outright selfishness, we're preoccupied. This one on the left, its focus is returning everything to itself. So just now move to the right hand side and consider these at least 10 people. Does this one on the left consider the well-being of these 10 from moment to moment with the same tenacity, urgency, compulsion as the one person on the left, i.e. me? So just as this person on the left has every right to be happy and not to suffer, so does each of the 10 at least on our right. Equally, there's not even a shade of difference in this regard. In fact, we might be one of those 10 people in someone else's meditation, even at this very moment in this room. So if you look at this situation objectively, impartially, if this person on the left could work for the benefit of the 10 on the right, instead of just on its own immediate purpose, how wonderful this would be. Because the needs of the 10 are in fact greater than the needs of the one. So just as you might consider the happiness of our family or our relations or our friends as more important than the group or the crowd, so make a resolve that we might develop techniques or paths to exploring how we might take responsibility for the welfare of these 10 with the same natural spontaneity that we have for caring for ourselves. And that in order to do this we need to be impartial and objective, and for this reason we're engaging in meditation, and we're engaging in meditation upon the breath. So now we move to the main body of the meditation, at least in terms of the focus of single-pointedness, and take the breath as our primary object, letting the visualization go that we established before. Just become aware of the breath coming and going, just as it is. Not letting one portion of the breath escape our awareness. We do this in a gentle but firm fashion. So with discriminating alertness, just peep in and see whether the mindfulness is upon the breath. If it's wandered or separated, replace without any fuss and continue the meditation. Just checking. If we're becoming sluggish or heavy, sinking in other words, lift our awareness as we might tighten the strings of the lute. Or if we're overexcited, scattered, we need to draw the mind in more firmly. If we're having a dialogue with thoughts, memories, or even our own body, these are distractions. Return to the breath. And in the final moments of the meditation, enhance the clarity of our awareness of the object, the breath. See it more vividly, more acutely. Now let go of the breath as our primary object, but without stopping the meditation, just re-establish awareness of the body, just as it is. Become aware of feelings, just as they are. Become aware of thoughts, just as they are. Become aware of all phenomena that appear to awareness, just as they are. Now we can gently relax our meditation posture, stretch, wriggle, whatever we need to do. So probably that meditation is a little bit longer than we might ideally set up in our beginning fledgling Dharma practice or our meditation practice, but it's including a series of essential ingredients so that we can sort of squeeze those or collapse them into a perfectly intact meditation in, say, 5 minutes if we wish. If we practice the meditation, particularly the motivation, we find we can establish that quite quickly. It becomes a form of awareness, and not only in meditation, but it also becomes a form of awareness outside of meditation. I'd like to say that we become more sensitive to others as a result of this meditation. So wisdom is very, very subtle. We become, I can use the word empathetic, I think. We sense more acutely the situation of others. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he's talking about developing compassion, says that if you see a wounded, he gives this example, you see a wounded dog on the road that has been knocked by a car and it's obviously in grievous pain, you spontaneously feel compassion. You don't have to kind of generate that through some conceptual thought process. Hopefully, at least. Maybe if you're very, very immune for whatever reason, you wouldn't even respond to that. But it's a very vivid example, isn't it, of an object of obvious compassion. But it's a much more subtle and creative process to begin to develop our mind so that we can feel compassion towards a being, any being, who isn't in a situation of such palpable, obvious pain. So we work to grow and develop our awareness by enhancing our investigation of the objects of compassion. So last week I touched upon the topic of impermanence, and I didn't have really much opportunity to develop that. So I'd like to touch upon that again. In Buddhism, 3 kinds of compassion are described. I mean, there's many different ways of talking about compassion, but this is a very valuable way of looking at it. And the first form of compassion has its object a being, a person, who is in obvious suffering. So we don't perhaps need to do a lot of work to begin to approach the meaning of that. The second compassion is more subtle, and that has as object of observation sentient beings or people, not just humans, but other sentient beings, who are qualified by momentary disintegration. It's starting to get very interesting, isn't it? We are qualified by momentary disintegration. We are disintegrating from moment to moment. If we weren't, we couldn't be changing. And if we weren't changing, we couldn't have come and sat down in this meditation room, let alone go to the gym or try to work with our body or our mind in some sort of transformative sense. The reality is that we are the product of causes and conditions. And because of that alone, we are in the nature of impermanence. We're not related to impermanence. We're not affected by impermanence. We're not impacted by impermanence, like a shaft of energy coming from outside and rupturing our permanence with impermanence as some sort of violation of our natural being. Our very nature is of itself impermanent. If something is a composite phenomena, it can only exist as a collection or an aggregation of things which are assembled. And the very fact that that assemblage is assembled by a constellation of various things means that there is nothing here in and of the object that is somehow permanent or established as that thing's identity in a fixed, solid manner that then becomes influenced or adjusted or related to the rest of the universe. It's already, in that sense, porous, completely to the flow of causes and conditions. And so I mentioned on the very first night, at the very end, there's a very exciting premise buried in this topic, which might sound a little bit alarming initially, the idea that we're disintegrating, we're disintegrators, is that the very fact that we're disintegrating is also evidence that we're forming. We're being produced from moment to moment. All we're saying, in fact, is that the causes of our production are also the causes of our disintegration. But it's that process happening together that enables the continuum of our being as an impermanent product. And because we're an impermanent product that is in a flow of a continuum, independent on causes and conditions, we can begin to regulate the way in which we evolve or form by beginning to work with causes and conditions in a more particular and skillful manner than we might otherwise do. So an analogy is useful here. If we're looking for happiness, I think we probably are. We're allowed to. It's our birthright to look for happiness. And we're grabbing a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here and trying to patch it all together and then solidify it into a lump of happiness that's going to be impervious to change by dint of our resolution that this is it. We're in for trouble because it doesn't work like that. But if instead we begin to skillfully transform ourselves with positive causes and conditions and begin to melt away and abandon negative causes and conditions, we begin to transform in a particular trajectory that can even be remarkable. We can leave habitual notions and modes of being completely behind. It's like sloughing 1,000 skins, if you like. We're not trapped in an identity that's somehow predeterminedly focusing the limits of our potential. Buddhism is saying that we have this infinite potential for positive being that will arise and expand by dint of removing the veils and the obscurations, the covering of negative conditions that are blocking us from that reality. So what we need to begin to do is to sift and siphon away, if you like, the mass, the heaviness of habitual negative responses to ourselves and the world, and replace them with positive responses. And so this isn't really a technical subject, it's a very sensitive psychological subject, because we're looking at states of mind. So Buddhism is going to give a very ordinary example of anger. Anger is a destructive mind because it destroys my happiness and stability, and it also has the potential of destroying its object. In fact, Buddhism defines anger as an intent to harm. And the absurdity of this mind is that it can even be directed to an inanimate object. What am I talking about here? If you're angry You can smash a door so loudly that it breaks off its hinges. You can hurtle a plate with such violence that it cuts someone. It becomes a weapon. This is the power of anger. So Buddhism says that not only is that moment of anger unfurling problematic, not just for me but for its victim, its target, but it leaves an imprint that will enable a similar mind to arise with less resistance in the future. So without getting elaborate here, we're talking about habituation. We habituate ourselves to these compulsive, limiting structures through generating particular minds that have this capacity and impact, and then develop them to a degree that they arise as if they were natural from their own side, without needing any causes and conditions. Thank you very much. And we all know someone who appears to be always angry, don't we? They're always two doors down. And if you just, even the kids run past, they yell at the kids for making a noise. They're just almost naturally angry. But Buddhism's going to say there's no such thing as a core essence of anger buried away in our being in some sort of permanent fixed prism that can be found, immune from change or causes and conditions. No such thing exists. All that's happened is that that person has attuned themselves repeatedly to that mode of destructive being to the extent that it saturates their awareness, and it's very difficult for them to act in any other way. So Buddhism says that that mind is very powerful and immensely destructive, but it can be completely melted away, completely dissolved by applying its antidotes. And so the mind of compassion and love, which I've touched upon tonight, are in very real ways the antidote to anger, for the simple reason that it has the impulse or the intention of helping its object. This isn't difficult stuff, is it? It's really straightforward. When you love someone, you don't want them to come to harm. And if they're about to come to harm, you will protect them. There's that story of the mother the other day in the hailstorm in Arnhem Land. You've all followed that story on the news. There was a massive hailstorm in Arnhem Land, and the hailstones were literally, I'm not exaggerating, they were this size. And they smashed her car. And she had a kid in the back seat, and that back window was smashed, and she threw her body over the child, and her body was completely battered and bruised, but the child was protected. And when she was interviewed, she said, well, that's what a mother does, doesn't she? She was kind of bemused at the attention. She's been up for a heroism award, I heard yesterday. She might be bemused by that as well, because isn't that what all mothers would do? But Buddhism is going to say that the mother in this regard is the perfect model of love, because she nurtures even at the expense of her own safety. So that's an example of this one. Over here's the mother, and here are 10 children who need protection. This one immediately goes to protection of those ones because she feels immediately their need. So Buddhism develops a kind of elaborate and integrated way of beginning to work with the minds that are arising as they arise, and then creatively transforming them or adjusting them so that the objects of the world begin to appear differently. The world presents differently. And I'll have to stop in a minute, but if we love someone, they appear attractive to us. This is in the Buddhist text. When I first heard this, I couldn't quite believe it. Love has the aspect, if a genuine love, of seeing people as attractive spontaneously towards us. As soon as we see them, not only are they lovable, but they're delightful. They're attractive. And we're not using the word attractive here in some silly way that we like the way they've done their hair. We have an affectionate response to them, straight away, without any barrier or filter. This is remarkable to think about. And so this is called affectionate love, and it's said to be a very, very precious thing to cultivate. So I think I might have covered enough material tonight, but these are just things to begin to think about. But I'm really trying to present a technology, really. I don't see myself as a religious person. I never have. I've had to work very hard with my approach to what is ostensibly a religious tradition to work out how to relate to it without becoming religious, because I'm not criticising religion here, it's just that as a person I find it difficult to be religious because I want to work things out myself. And so I've just very quietly pruned away at these things, and I've found that what comes back to me as I sort of quietly move through these things is that the simplest things that I heard at the beginning of my contact with Buddhism are the things that have become more and more meaningful to me. And so when I had a discourse on love the first time, I thought, oh yeah, you come along, start going to church, you hear about love, love. But what is love really? It's, these are huge and extraordinary topics to begin to explore. So wonderful things to begin to explore, and we have the capacity to begin to do that in our own lives, starting from now. And so Buddhism says that we obviously we already love some people probably do all right, don't we, with some people? We love them pretty well. They become the basis to begin to expand towards the next person and the next person. Buddhism says if we try to develop a kind of a universal love or a cosmic love, which appears to be what I was talking about before with the group on this side, it's pretty far-reaching. We can develop a kind of artificial, abstract idea. Oh yeah, I love everyone. I don't hate anyone. I'm basically a really nice person, thank you very much. I don't have to do these meditations. But that's not how it works. Because as soon as someone irritates me, that is the very moment I am called upon to do my practice. And I must admit, I am irritated frequently. And so in terms of our meditation practice, an irritating person is an enemy because they're appearing unattractive. Their irritation appears to be a quality of them impinging on me. Stop irritating me. It's completely self-focused. I've had the experience of being irritated with a queue, waiting in a queue, and having a really slow person in front of me and wishing that they would move faster. And then I discover they've got a major physical disability and they're struggling to stand at all. And at that moment, my frustration drops catastrophically away because I'm appalled that I've constructed this person as an obstacle, as an irritation. And so Buddhism is going to say that the sources of what appear to be irritating are actually the inverse side of our egotistic structuration of our hard and fast little brutal envelope syndrome that's trying to yield personal benefits at the expense of the world. It's based on fear and all sorts of problematic emotions, that kind of tight self. We can afford to begin to let that go. And so we move away from the kind of structuration here of, in important ways, Western psychological structures, because we're going to want to go quite some distance in destructuring the ego. So Buddhism isn't anti-ego psychology, by the way. This is a big topic. I'll just touch on it at the end if you want to think about it, or you have a psychological interest or background. We have to have a functioning self, and to do that we have to be integrated sufficiently to be able to function successfully. but that we can do much more than that. We can go further. And so we're not giving up being responsible, but we're trying to utilise the vast depth of our potential resources. So it can be pretty inspiring, can't it? Sometimes I like watching Australian Story. It tends to be sentimental, doesn't it? But you have some of these stories of young people. There was one young man who had travelled in Africa, and he realised that people were spending huge amounts of their day walking for water, and then lugging water back literally on their backs, that was so heavy that it was physically incapacitating for them. And he thought, what if they had bicycles? And they couldn't afford bicycles, they had no money. But he said, well, what about all the bikes in garages in Australia? Did anyone see this? It was marvellous. This young man decided to recruit everyone he knew to give their unused bicycles so that they could be shipped in containers to African villages in order that people could use them to collect water. And he succeeded, because it was such a perfectly, purely motivated moment of insightful, compassionate genius that emerged from him. It was inspired by this simplicity of compassionate thought. It was so simple, that solution, but no one had thought to do it. So compassion is wise, it's skillful. It's not just a kind of a emotional tone that we're trying to train ourselves to have. It transforms our world. So on this inspiring note, because that is many of these stories we could talk about, but we're capable of our own little moments of inspired genius, of creative kindness and so forth. Just to think that we give away any energy of the session in the form of a dedication towards the goal. So this is a little micro meditation. Just draw the mind in, and then just quickly establishing the earlier visualisation of ourselves on the left, impartial observer in the middle, and the group on the right. And just feel how wonderful it would be if this one on the left, i.e. my usual habitual self, was able to see more clearly how to work for the benefit or fulfil the needs of the group on the right in a skillful way. And in fact, this group on the right is infinite in number. So in this way we dedicate that all beings without exception might have happiness, both temporal and ultimate, up until full enlightenment. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow, and may that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. So thank you very much.